to welcome you all to the ICMC Councillors Induction of Catchment Management, Catchment River Management. So I first would, there's going to be some staff online, and but I'll get Greg to do the karakia and then introduce all the staff this morning. Thank you.
Kia ora, thanks. Thanks, Mr. Chair, and good morning, councillors. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kinakina ke uta, kia mā taratara ke tai, he aki ana ata te atakura, he tio, he ho, he huka, he hohu, ti hei Māori ora. Thanks, councillors. So this workshop is the first. Actually, no, it's not the first now, because we have actually given you a bit of a briefing on our resilience program and also our emergency management responsibilities. So it's a bit of a continuation of an induction that we wanted to do with you on the work program that the Integrated Catchment Management Directorate is responsible for. So today we'll be focusing on catchment and river management, and joined today by Grant Blackie, our manager catchments. And Grant's got several of his team joining us. We've got Tane Desmond, who's been around forever, looks after the Waikato, or the Waikato catchment, not Upper Waikato Taupo, but more the Waikato Waipa and West Coast area. We've got Emily O'Donnell online, who you all know very well as well. Em looks after our Hauraki Coromandel catchments. And we've got Kerry Nielsen as well, who's our principal advisor to Grant, and particularly in the area of catchment river management. And you know Kerry from the work that she's doing on the regional catchment framework. Next slide, please, Jordan. Yeah. So today I will hear myself somewhere. So today we'll cover off the Catchment River program. So Grant and his team will take us through why we do it, what we do, and especially have a conversation with yourselves about what you can expect from a governance point of view over the triennium. What I will do briefly is give you an overview of the integrated catchment management, just to remind you of the whole picture. So I've put in this picture, and this was actually one that was done in the old days with River and Catchment Services, and it was really put together to talk about the full range of work that we do as a directorate. Now, the big message with this picture is and I know that we've had a conversation about this as well as part of local government reforms, is it's really important to look at to take a whole of catchment approach when we're delivering services. We're working catchments, delivering different work, whether it be to do with our catchment rivers, our biosecurity and biodiversity, or our schemes. We're often working with the same landowners, and so it's really important that the work that we do really meshes well together and ultimately provides better outcome for the catchments. So that's a really important theme that we stick to with the work that we do, and make sure, as the name says, that we do have an integrated catchment management approach. Go to the next slide, please. So we went through a review as a directorate over the last couple of years, and sorry, this is maybe a little bit small, but I'd like to just briefly introduce you to my senior leadership team, because often that'll be the people who you'll be having a lot to do with over this triennium. So first, we've got our manager biosecurity and biodiversity, Patrick Whaley, and that was a part of the team that was largely unchanged through the review process. So looking after both pest animal, pest plants, and biodiversity operations. And we've got Grant, who looks after our catchment and river activities, which we will learn a lot more about soon. Next is infrastructure, and we have at the moment an acting manager in place, Steve Babish. He's away at the moment, but so we're going through the recruitment process for that right now. We've had a couple of rounds, but haven't had a success, so we're trying again.
Manager of planning and support.
Yep. So Steve, and infrastructure did see a big change with our review, because what that did was really brought together all of the different aspects of our infrastructure into one area, particularly our engineering and asset management into the team that also looks after our operational capital delivery. Next, we have planning and support. So Dave Wade is looking after that team, and that includes our environmental planning, our environmental consenting, and also our emergency management and regional resilience teams that you've met already. And he's also got quite a significant business support team based out of Hamilton. And then we have our manager portfolio delivery. So Julie Beaufort, again, you would have heard a lot about our infrastructure capital program. So her current focus is on our infrastructure program and making sure that it is set up to deliver well. But the intent of that role is to also take a wider look at how we manage our portfolios as a directorate. And lastly, I've got a principal advisor, Sandra Balcom, who helps with our strategic planning and with managing risks across the directorate. So yeah, that's the senior leadership team, and you'll meet various people at our ICMC meeting coming up on the 18th of March, so not too far away. But you'll also meet the team during these workshops as well. So that's an overview of ICM, but I won't take up any more of your time. So I'll pass over to Grant to introduce you over the next hour to catchment and river management. Got a Grant.
Kia ora tātou, councillors. Yeah, so we'll be running through quite a lot of information in an hour, which is a short period of time to cover it. Some of you will be quite familiar with work we do from your previous role as council. I will be particularly familiar being back on the Waipa Catchment Committee going back 6 years more. But anyway, just a quick run through. We will have time for questions after I'm speaking, Tano's speaking, and Emily's speaking. There'll be opportunities for questions and some time at the end, hopefully, for questions. We might have to take some questions away if we run out of time, because I know you've got other things on after 10:30. We've just got a little map of the region there, and most of you will know the region is split into those zones, the 8 zones for management purposes. We have the four red dots, stars, where we have catchment management teams, the Whitianga office, Wairoa, Hamilton and Taupo. We have 42 staff spread around those offices. There are significant differences between the issues in each of the zones, as you can imagine. The pumice soils in Taupo, the gully erosion, all the issues around Lake Taupo, running up through the Waiho, the big flood protection scheme, the Waiho Valley scheme, Coromandel with its clay soils and predominance of damaging storm events that come through on a regular basis, and running around the other side, the lower Waikato and all the hill country in the west coast and the Waipa. A big area and lots of different issues to deal with through that area. Catchment committees were the interface with the community up until 6 years ago. And we used to have a lot to do with catchment committees, but there's been that gap in that interface since. We have zone-based teams working in each of the zones. This is just a way of managing our work, essentially. But obviously, some of the offices and zones are quite remote from Hamilton, so we're spread out. Each zone has its own management plan, and these are non-statutory documents that pull together all the issues relating to river and catchment management and look at the priorities for that zone. Of course, not of course, those zone management plans are quite out of date. Some of them are over 10 years since they were reviewed. We also have catchment management plans. So we have some for Aotea, Kawhia, Whangaroa, harbour catchments, also on the Coromandel harbour catchments, also the Waipa catchment plan. Got some large existing soil conservation schemes. Taupo, Pyro Range, Reparoa, Waitomo, Waiho Valley scheme. And the value of the work this is over 10 years ago now, was valued at $60 million in those schemes. We'll talk a little bit about those later. Our base level of work is to provide an advisory service, even if we're not putting in any money into river and catchment management issues, so we can provide advice and then running all the way through to doing work. One of the key areas is for us to integrate across the council's various activities, biodiversity, with our science team, with the regulatory team, and so forth. Issues, well, fundamentally, over 200,000 hectares of land under pasture classified as having severe to extreme erosion potential. Most of our focus is on reducing erosion and river management, riverbank management, where our focus is. Declining water quality, many of the Waikato lowland streams, you'll be familiar with that. Of course, climate change, increasing incident and risk of high intensity rainfall seem to be more frequent. And we've had a couple of very damaging events this year already in Coromandel and Waipawa West Coast. Rising farm gate inflation, costs of implementing erosion control and water quality mitigations. This is a real issue for landowners, and Tane will get into how we'll help them out with our cost sharing and co-funding. There's many other related issues, the loss of biodiversity, etc. Can't go too much in the history due to time, but really 1941 was the birth of catchment authorities, and they really only had a couple of functions: soil conservation, flood protection, and rivers control. That's when catchment authorities were set up in the 40s. And we didn't have all these other functions like land transport and regulatory or anything else. It was very simple days. The government used to tip in all the money, or most of the money, in terms of doing work right through the 70s and up until 92. And this is when the large schemes around Taupo, Waitomo, Waihea Valley, etc. were built. And they're very extensive. Once the government money was dropped, Waikato resorted just to doing isolated farm plans, and there wasn't much funding whatsoever. There was probably a 10-year gap until Project Watershed came in 2002, when we got really back into doing catchment and river work. Why do we undertake this work? And the mandate for doing the work, there's many parts to the mandate. It stems from the Soil Conservation and Rivers Control Act, but there's other legislation as well, the Hauraki Gulf Marine Parks Act, water quality, the RMA freshwater management requirements from central government, Te Uri Whai Mana, the vision and strategy for the Waikato and Waipawa rivers, which requires an improvement in water quality, not just maintenance. That sits at the same level as a national policy statement. So it directs the council in terms of its regional policy statement, a regional plan as to what we need to do in terms of water quality. Regional coastal plan also has measures around relating to our work. Talk a little bit about the strategic direction in a minute. The National Environment Bill is the latest one on the horizon. It requires, at the moment, it requires councils to show that they have pursued non-regulatory approaches to improving water quality before resorting to regulation. I'll just put in a couple of things there from the regional plan that relate to our work. It specifically says that we'll look at funding the promotion of stabilisation of unstable rivers, lake beds, etc. And the second one there goes on to the range of things we do: education, advice, and the work to reduce erosion and sediment discharges. The strategic direction is, as you'll be familiar, the ink's just drying on this from a week or two back. And there's a direct link to our work, which is nice. Water quality maintained, improved, riverbanks stable, flood risks reduced. The second part there, to deliver targeted, collaborative and innovative catchment and river management programs. That's probably the shortest way of summing up our whole work program in those few words. And continue to deliver multi-partner management programs. A little bit on the funding policies. So there's a whole of catchment approach to funding flood protection, drainage, catchment and river management. This was initially through Project Watershed for the Waikato Waipawa catchment. 2002 is when that came into place. And then that model was subsequently rolled out across the rest of the region. They are separate funding models, but they follow the same overall model. The project watershed, there's a lot to project watershed. It goes through who are the exacerbators, who are the beneficiaries, are the benefits local, in that catchment, or are they regional? And it sets out the whole basis for who pays what portion of the rate take for all of the activities subject to project watershed. It's a groundbreaking document at the time.
We've just had a discussion this morning, Robbie, I and Greg, and that bottom bullet point is very much where we're coming back to and looking at two subcommittees that we have at the moment, Hauraki and Lower Waikato, getting more involved in the budgets, etc., in either August or September coming long-term plan. So more on this as we go.
Yep.
Thanks.
Already
Yep.
put that down as a note later on.
Yeah, priority areas were determined for a range of matters, but taking into account stakeholder and technical information at the time. And yeah, we did have catchment committees as interface, which would advise on all sorts of things relating to each zone. Seem to have through my slides with a little bit of time. If there are any questions, or we can move on.
Yeah, those catchment plans, I remember being
Yeah.
one. Well, what's the plans to update those? They are 10 or years. And a lot of work, a lot of funding by WRA, etc. What's the plans for going forward?
So right at the moment, we're working on a full review of our catchment and river programs through Kerry Nielsen's project, the Regional Catchment Management Framework project. This is coming to a workshop to you on the 31st of March.
Yeah, so you've had an introduction to the project, and there'll be a further workshop coming.
Yeah, so that project is looking at all of our programs, and there's a number of recommendations, or draft recommendations, will be put in front of you in a couple of weeks.
Morena Grant. When you look at the work that we've done, like Nola said, over the years, what Waipa, the storm that happened is something out of the blue, you know. So with your hand on your heart, do you believe that the work we have done over the years help to minimize that damage there? And what now around that? Because we did a lot of work, you did a lot of work, you had a lot of funding, blah, blah, blah. And some of the places is hit as some of the places we actually worked on. So I wondered in your head, you know, had we done enough? Is this something that's going to carry on where we don't know what's going to happen? So we have to look outside that square more often. And how much funds did we have to get into from our own WRC funds to help that
Yeah,
mahi
yeah,
up
yeah.
there?
Well, very shortly, because yeah, we will be coming back to this topic, or the latest storm events at future meetings and things. But just your first point, we have done very little work in the Prongia stream catchments where the severe damage occurred. We have done very little work, and most of the damage, you know, has come out of the steep part of the mountain and the dock land and come down through the narrow channels through farmland. So that's one point to make. But the second point is, yeah, absolutely. Areas where we have done extensive work are more resistant to riverbank erosion, catchment erosion, whatever it might be. But of course, you know, there's a big job ahead of us, always is, and we can't predict where the rain will fall any given year. But absolutely, the work we're doing is making a difference. There are many examples. And we are planning to take you on a field trip later in April down towards the King Country River Care, show you some sites for those who are interested. And I think the third point was around funding in relation to storm events. So we do have our existing funding, we do have government funding, which we can crunch to as the river management funding we have at the moment, which we can move into some of this work. We have our disaster recovery funding, and we also have zone reserves. So we do have reasonable resourcing at our at our fingertips, well, close to our fingertips to respond to this kind of event. In the Waipa, not everywhere. Yeah, we did just a small point. This is not the end of the presentation. So Tane's will be talking next, and then Emily, and then we can perhaps if we can come back to further questions at the end, or I might take a short one now.
Or is yours?
I don't have a question of you, I have a question of the chairs of the committee. Given what we've heard, can we hold up the rationale of having only 2 catchment responsibilities? Because we'll go to Waipa and that community doesn't have an opportunity to speak into their own catchment. So just for thinking, I'm not asking for a reply.
Sure.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Is your question, Mike, relevant?
Well, yeah, it does. It follows on from Catherine. I mean, ours is, as you well know, the lake is at maximum consent. So we've just got erosion happening all around there, and these weather events are happening a lot more now. It's the same as the last event that we had down there, down Kuratau. So I've got ratepayers screaming out to me. So, how much money do we keep on putting in this? And I mentioned this 2 years ago, do we say if Mercury is going to keep the lake at the maximum consent level, then, if there's going to be erosion, and I'm talking about even some of the bays that there's no people living on, it's eaten right away. I went out to Whakaipo Bay right out there, and the shore's just eaten right away where normally people put up their barbecues and stuff like that. So it's a huge thing that happens every time, and these weather events are happening. Why can't we, and I know they've got a resource consent, never got publicly notified. Why can't we say, right, if Mercury are going to keep, because it's $1 billion company, will keep the level at the maximum height, because they won't even drop it 50 mils, that if any erosion happens, then they help come into the party as well. That's what I've argued with over the last 3 years.
If the committee want to be briefed on that one, it would need to come back at a later date, and our regulatory team who manage the Mercury consent would need to be part of that discussion.
Is it relevant, Gary, to the questions? Okay, where you go.
So when we look at erosion, and I've been read through the interim report from Plan Change 1 from the Environment Court, and are we recognising enough of what's happening within the river itself? And and they do note that. I was just going through my notes quickly to try and find a place, but and a lot of erosion is so you're talking about climatic stuff, but there's also land use and riverbank planting and things like that, which is all good. But it strikes me that when reading through the court ruling, that there's also a big issue with pests inside, namely koi carp and things like that, causing an awful lot of erosion damage. And so within the regional council, are we actually looking at the right things and attacking the right things, or putting enough emphasis on the internal rather than the external?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to talk about koi carp, and it's outside my scope, but we'll come on to the science we're using for determining our priorities for this work. So we're using the best available science to determine where we should be implementing the programs we have. And perhaps if I could just leave it at that for the moment, we'll come back to what we're actually doing in that area.
Thank you. Chris, a quick question.
Just a couple of points relating to Mikhail's comments. First question, and no, you don't want to talk about koi carp. Are there any koi in Lake Taupo?
Not as far as I know.
So we can't blame the generators for erosion if that's the case. And the second point is, if you try and charge the generators, you know who they're going to charge. It won't hurt them at all.
Right.
Liz has just got one question, and then we'll move on.
It was actually just to answer your question around a further workshop around the Mercury consent and things like that. I would like that. Yes, please.
I wasn't proposing a workshop, but a presentation. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll leave that for Greg to consider. I'll pass over to Tane now to cover through the nuts and bolts of what we do on the ground.
Morning, councillors, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to our program today. I'm going to talk about our work streams and our approach, and I've got a number of images that will help, I guess, illustrate some of the challenges and opportunities we have in the catchment. Our work program is broken in largely into three components. So catchment management, which is soil conservation or erosion control. That's focusing on water quality and protecting our productive soils, both of which are critically important for our rural ag sector and underpin the Waikato economy. This work also delivers on riparian and biodiversity protection and enhancement as well. The second one is our river management program. The focus there is on bank stability and capacity and looking to achieve or improve resilience to flooding and storm events and reduce the impacts. And outside of our flood control schemes, that's where we deliver most of our kind of flood relief for landowners, if you're thinking upper catchment rivers and streams. Final one there is maintenance. So this is about maintaining the works delivered in the previous two work programs, and it's largely focused also on our catchment control schemes that Grant mentioned. And this work is delivered on a zone basis right across the region. It not only benefits the property where the work's undertaken, but landowners downstream and communities, and also receiving environments, whether that be the Hauraki Gulf or the lower river system. We do this work by working directly with farmers and care groups or community groups. We're able to provide information, advice. Council has a really good range of various guides that we can make available to landowners and care groups undertaking work at no charge. We do incentivise work within priority catchments and rivers, and that's generally to sort of encourage physical works on the ground, so fencing, planting, erosion control in streams and rivers as well. I've included the funding rates there. Those are our base funding rates. I'll talk a little bit later about leveraging, but we go out and leverage funding, additional funding from others to help reduce the cost and build our program. Landowners are able to also offset their share of the cost through actual work on the ground. So if they do the fencing, that'll count towards their share of that project cost. And there's some variation across the zones, which sort of date back to some historical commitments to maintain our schemes in particular. Another important aspect of our work is implementation or delivery support. So we do deliver the river management program, and in a catchment space, we'll often go out and procure plants in bulk, and we can use our buying power when we're buying large quantities to get sharper prices and to maintain quality as well. And the final aspect is, maintaining this work, which is critically important, which you'll appreciate, I'm sure. Both Grant and I've mentioned prioritisation. So we use models to identify where we should be focusing our efforts. They're ground truth through monitoring and also through conversations with the community, stakeholders and councillors. They're captured in our zone plans, and albeit out of date, they're a very useful reference for us. The image in the centre there is a model which illustrates the erosion risk across the entire region. The red area is the highest risk areas, and blue the lowest. Taking that a step further, the map on the right-hand side is the Waipa zone, and we've actually translated that information into priority subcatchments. So those yellow areas there are our key catchments for dealing with erosion risk, and the blue rivers are our main rivers for stream and riverbank erosion. There's a few checks and balances around our work. The LTP includes measures to keep us on track. So our target is at least 80% of our funding is spent within priority catchments, and 80% of our priority actions completed annually. And the final one there's around catchment maintenance. So that's about protecting and maintaining previously completed works. And the target there is at least 85% of that work is maintained in a effective condition with stock excluded. Going down another level, so this is 2 priority catchments of the 8 or so in the Waipa. If you disregard the light green, which is dock estate, the other shaded areas are properties that we're working on. The intention here is to try and build momentum in that community, to leverage off the gains and the investment that's been made in the past. And although by no means have we finished all the work that needs to be done in there, we have a really good coverage of landowners who we're working with. Lots of these landowners have multi-year agreements in place with us, and we're supporting them to deliver that work. I mentioned leveraging funding. I think this is one thing that the catchment section does particularly well is take out our targeted rate funding and seek external funding from outside the region to support our work. There's a range of funders who are interested in supporting this work, and we make a real effort to tap into as much of that funding as we possibly can. The graph there illustrates, well, the vertical is the expenditure. Each bar is annual expenditure. The blue is the targeted rate input. The green is landowner share. And but that's really interesting is the red segment through the middle there. And that's just illustrating that over the past, 2013 to 2025, we've substantially grown that external funding. And that not only enables us to deliver more work on the ground, but it significantly reduces the cost to the landowner. There's a few things that we won't fund. It's certainly not a free-for-all. So if an action, perhaps planting, is required by resource consent, maybe there's a water take, or maybe there's a subdivision occurring and landowner is required to do some planting or retirement, then we don't support that work. We don't support work on public land or a DOC estate. We leave that responsibility to them. And we don't undertake large-scale or landscape pest control. So essentially that would be delivered through our biosecurity team. There's a requirement in catchment new works at least to protect that investment if council's contribution exceeds $35,000 or with our external funders it exceeds $70,000. So this is about protecting that investment on that property, binding future landowners to maintain that work. We've got our own covenants, but we also use QE2 and Ngā Whenua Rahui. The benefit there is that they often bring funding to the table, which means that one, the landowner perhaps doesn't need to fork out quite as much, or in many cases, it enables us to do more work on the ground.
I've got a couple here. There's 3 down now. If you want to continue, or now it's up to you guys. Now, Gary McGuire's first.
Just going back to what Grant said about the consent levels, the power dams have been, Te Apa has been held at maximum level. Is that the 35725 Matakari that was set with Project Watershed, and is it being held without the buffer that was set? Because that has implications in the lower Waikato.
I can answer that one if you want. So Mercury do operate the Waikato Hydro Scheme, which includes like Taupo under consents. I think if council or the committee is looking for some more detail around that, I think we should have a separate one, a separate workshop or discussion, because that'll get into the detail about what those consents required and the kind of framework that sits around those consents as well.
Be helpful to do the Project Watershed because we never did that last term either with
Sure.
that.
Sure, but the levels themselves are set through the resource consents.
Yeah, but just that one level, that absolute ultimate level is 35725. Is that what it's been run to, and taking into account what McCarthy?
They can come back to you. They don't know if.
Yeah. So what I can say is that Mercury do operate the lake within minimum and maximum levels, and it all depends on what's happening in the catchment, the inflows and the outflows. But as I said, I think it's better if we want to have a discussion around how the system is being managed particularly from a consenting point of view, that we should bring something back to you separately.
Yeah, I think that's pertinent to what.
Yeah, I understand, but it's not relevant to what we're discussing today. Okay. Gary Roma.
Couple of comments. Made one about the damage around the Porongi area that coming down from out of the dockland. And then how does it relate? Because that's where the damage is coming from, dockland. So it's coming from native bush and everything else, which is my own assessment when I went through that area, and I know well. And so how does that line up with all your planning, the river banks and that? So when we look at the damage done and the flooding and the blockages of the rivers and the streams and everything else, none of it was from farmer planting or anything else, or riverbank planting. It all come out of dock. So once again, are we targeting the right things, or to save our rivers? First point, and can I ask the second question?
You
lining
go
up?
for it.
Yep, so and the second question also, you commented about the planting and your buying power. You know, are you going to the open market to get the best price for product, or are you bidding? Because, you know, I've seen some stuff here that, you have to buy first from either, nurseries that are aligned with either, you know, Maori entities rather than going to the complete open market. So, you know, are you using your buying power, or are you restricted to where you can buy from?
I'll answer the first part. Yeah. Got it. I'll just reply to the first bit about the damage in the dock estate. We don't really have time at the minute, but I mean, that was a 250-year annual return interval event on a steep mountain. And it didn't matter what vegetation was there. There were shallow landslides. You can't actually do anything in terms of, you say, are we targeting the right areas? You can't do anything about that. It's more about assessing the risk, the hazard areas below those mountainous areas, and what is allowed to be built within them, and what we might do within the part we do have control over in terms of plantings, in terms of setbacks, where you might build buildings or whatever it might be. We're very lucky there were no houses or more than one death. But yeah, I can't really go much further than that. It was a natural event that was off the scale, and you can't do anything about that in terms of the dock estate.
Yeah, with regard to procurement, so we do a mixture. So sometimes we have partnership projects with community groups, EV entities, and Shovel Ready was some projects, and Shovel Ready are examples of that, where we actually worked with community nurseries and procured plants through them. We were very much conscious of what competitive pricing was. But we do definitely go through the open market. We just recently sourced about 30,000 plants that went through GETS. We had a local nursery secure that tender. But I'll say that some of our community nurseries are very competitive as well. Often they're very close proximity to where the work's happening, and so their transportation costs are very low. So it is a mixture, but yep, we can go to the open market when we need to.
Thank you.
Jennifer?
No, yeah, Jennifer. Got a question, Jen?
Yes, sure, thanks. The drop in other co-funding in 23-24 onwards, do you have a thoughts on that, and whether you expect that to go up again?
Yeah, that was tied to Shovel Ready. So obviously there was significant funding funneled into preserve jobs and into the environmental area as well. So yeah, it's a shame we don't have the recent data, because we've just been successful in securing tranche 2 funding, which will help. And we had I can't remember the name of it, CIP funding in the last couple of years. But yeah, we've got existing relationships with MPI, WRA as well. So
Any other questions, Jen?
Yeah, can I just
Or
make a comment on the dams issue? Sorry, you might say it's out of scope, but the issue is I was online absolutely regularly during that recent event, and it's not the water coming out of Taupo that's the issue, it's what comes out of Karapiro that's the issue. But I went along all 9 dams, and many of the lakes had been emptied, and but the management of the river through that event was incredible. Because in days gone by, my place would have been absolutely flooded. Got to within the top inches or millimeters of the top of the bank, and it stayed there for the duration of about 3 days, and then it started to go down. The management, what it was in 1998, which was abysmal, to where it is now, is absolutely wonderful. So it's the movement through the dams, and there was absolute capacity to move the water through. And whilst it might have been high at Taupo, it was taken up over the several days, and Karapiro spilled, and then it was stopped to allow the peak through the Waipa. And at Ngārawahi, it didn't go above, I think it was 14.1 or whatever it was.
Thank you.
So the way it's managed is important.
Thank you for explaining that, Noel, but as I said, I think that whole discussion needs to go into a,
Well, I don't think we need a discussion. I think
no,
it's been done
but I
well.
mean, we were promised a workshop about Project Watershed last term, and it never happened. So that's a discussion to have in that with that workshop, because for us to understand how the funding of Project Watershed and how Hamilton City's involved in it and everything else, I think that needs to be explained to councillors. Is there any other questions? Mine was actually back. I got one. Just how do you communicate with the community now? The catchment committees you aren't involved in those. So is it just community groups or is it just Lando? How do you get out there and consultate with the community at the moment?
Yeah, I wonder if we might come back to that at the end.
That's fine.
because
Yeah, I just put
we're
it
not
out there.
going to get through our presentation by 10:30 at this
Yep.
rate.
Cool.
Yeah, thank you.
Next slide, thank you. So I'll move on to how we actually go about implementing this work. So staff are very much on site with farmers. We're invited onto property. We work with individuals or groups of landowners. We're there to provide some advice or some insights into dealing with a particular issue or a range of issues. Where it meets our funding criteria, we put in place agreements which outlined the actions, the timeframes, the costs, the conditions of the funding, and the all-important cost share arrangements. They all include detailed maps so we can be very clear about, excuse me, what work is occurring where and the alignment of fences and the like. Cool, so move into catchment management. By no means full illustration of what we're targeting, but just some of the key things. So everything from pumice, hill country, gully erosion in the upper Waikato Taupo, soil slip erosion in the King Country, coastal forests on the foreshore around Coromandel and the west coast. One of our key mitigations for hill country erosion is poplar pole planting. These are specifically bred new generation of poles. These are quite different to the old Lombardis and the cottonwood poplars that you see falling over around the countryside 30 or 40 years after planting. So we're part of a collective group of councils who are supporting research and development into, growing better poplars that smaller canopy, but retaining that really good root system and that ability to remove groundwater out of the soil. This is a property in the King Country, working with the landowner to establish a plantation of poplars. One of the other benefits is they don't need full retirement from stock. So this land still remains viable for grazing and pastoral use. They're also an excellent source of fodder in drought times, and they lose their leaves over winter, so it lets sunlight through to pasture and doesn't cause impacts there. Annually, we plant about 10,000 poplars, and we've now got a local source within the Moturonga district, which is great. In the past, we had to actually bring them in from outer regions, so it's really good to see a local supplier. Land retirement and fencing, planting, obviously really core to our work. Annually, we do about 180 kilometres of fencing, retire approximately 1,000 hectares a year. This is a site out at Waimai in the northern west coast zone, where we work with the landowner to retire about 15 hectares of highly erodible hill country. That's been planted in small grade Manuka and Kanuka, and with a mix of longer lived species to just assist at that regeneration into a more permanent native forest cover. Just a couple of staff out on site. They didn't do that planting. They are there just checking to make sure the contractors did a good job. We also come across some pretty high value ecosystems. So the image on the left is a coastal wetland in the Coromandel, classic bittern habitat, and that's actually a bittern in that bottom right photograph if you look closely. We'll incorporate these into our work program as well and work with our colleagues in the biodiversity team. The one in the top right is actually in Taupo. It's the Tauhara Mountain project. So we're working with a community group and supporting them to do restoration activities there. We also support land care and stream care groups, the likes of the Waitomo Catchment Care Group, King Country, River Care, and many others. This particular project here is a partnership with Ngāti Hawa Mahi Trust in the central and well, they also own the Haraki, obviously. This is in the central where we have a joint funding application to WRA, and WRA are supporting them to propagate plants and plant back along the awa. Moving on to river management, yeah, some classic river management shots there, failing vegetation and trees along waterways. That's in the Coromandel, but it's widespread. And the images on the left, top left, is the Waipa River just last week following the recent storm events, getting awfully close to Otiwa Road. From a stream or riverbank perspective, this is an example of a project west of Otorohanga, Honakiwi, where there's some significant bank erosion occurring there and a slip undermining the local district road. And we worked with that landowner to put in place erosion control structures around the outside bend, and then fence and plant it with a mix of riparian natives and also Matsurana willows. So yeah, willows have a bit of a bad rep. Matsuranas, like those poplars, are especially bred for erosion control, but the intention here is that they will be removed once the native takes over. They are a short-term fix. I mentioned rock groins. The image on the left is just an example of what they look like on the ground. So essentially, we're bringing rock in to build structures to deflect the flow and prevent the river churning further back. But we also utilise trees and other natural materials. So that tree in the foreground there is actually a willow that's tied back into the bank. It's a softer engineering approach, and it's all really good value for money as well. So I mean, that's free. Cutting rock into sites isn't. The other thing I would say is our resource consents. We have a number of comprehensive consents. They are extremely important to enable us to do our work and support landowners. We can do things like on the right-hand side there, dig into the beds of rivers, which is usually frowned upon, but in this case, it's well justified. The other part to river management, as you'll probably all attend to, is vegetation management. We have inherited historic planting that perhaps is well beyond its use by date. Some of it's been planted, some of it has naturally occurred and spread. The image on the right there is from Coromandel. You can see that stump is completely hollow inside. So these things are just our liability sitting there, ready to fall into the river. And you know, we often have really important infrastructure, whether it's flood control infrastructure or roads or local bridges downstream. And once these things pile up on those, it is not a good news story. So we have a program of removing those and trying to get ahead of that. It's a big program. It's going to take a long time to deal with. We also have channels like the Waikato River that are navigated by boats. The image in the bottom left is a tree that's come down the river and established itself in the middle of the channel. And we have stream mouths around the Coromandel that it's imperative that they are kept open during high rainfall events, sorry. The final work stream is catchment maintenance. So this is focused on maintaining previous works. The primary focus is on those catchment control schemes that were established during the 70s and 90s. They have what we call a land improvement agreement on it. So that's a type of covenant that it requires the landowner to maintain them, and in some instances it actually requires the council to be a funder of that as well. The image on the right is of the Upper Waikato and Taupo schemes. For example, the Taupo scheme is about 220 properties, over 6,000 hectares and 1,000 kilometres fencing, so it's a big lot of work. And as you appreciate, it's all coming to sort of the end of its life. So we're supporting those landowners to maintain fencing and transition what was a lot of exotic planting to a lower maintenance native vegetation. When the work's all said and done, we capture costs. We do a financial reconciliation. So obviously this is cost share. So it might result in a refund to the landowner or an invoice, depending on whether we delivered the work or they did. We capture outputs. So it's really important for us to capture in our asset management system and mapping systems where this work is done, not only reporting to council and our co-funders, but also to help us monitor and maintain these areas. try and maintain the gains, but also avoid the liability and some of the issues we're facing now, specifically around removal of that historic riverbank planting. The two graphs on screen are just 2 examples of some of the data we've got. The one on the left is 20 years worth of fencing data, and the one on the right is planting data. And you'll see a couple of spikes that, stand out as anomalies. That was shovel-ready funding, which was a big injection of cash into the Hauraki, Coromandel, Lower Waikato in particular, which saw quite an increase in our planting programs. Cool, I'll leave it there.
I think we'll pass to Emily at this point to do a bit of a run through on our response to the catchments team flood response work. If you're available, Emily.
I'm ready to roll, Grant. Thank you. Morena koutou i te rangatirama. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, councillors. Sorry to be beaming in from Whitianga and not there in the room with you today. Jordan, I'm hoping you're driving and we'll click as we go through. Just to give some scale in terms of this image, you can see with this chap looking pretty chuffed in his kayak, that's sitting in about 2.5 to 3 metres of water through what is normally a road out to Hotwater Beach. So this was taken and probably seen on social media by a number of you during the January event. If we can click through, Jordan, please. So I just want to give you a bit of a snapshot of what it looks like from our river and catchment perspective during an event and how we roll. So we activate, we operate under our zone flood manuals, and so these exist in all of our zones across the region. They're a really key document for us. And a critical role through this is actually that we provide situational intelligence and coordination of resources, and often managing that local political interface as well. And we get relied on quite heavily in terms of that information, not only through our own internal channels, but also to Civil Defence, NZTA and others. So for Grant's team, we're responsible for the flood response for West Coast, Central, Taupo, Upper Waikato, Waipa and Coromandel, and our whānau and infrastructure section are responsible for Waihopiako and Lower Waikato, and that's just due to the larger schemes through there. So these are some terms that you probably will have heard when Pete from Emergency Management came and spoke to you. And so I thought it'd be good to just refamiliarise you with these, and that is the LOC and LFC, just to add a few more acronyms to your list. So the LOC is the Local Operations Controller, and this role provides situational intelligence to the regional coordinator. And then you have the LFC, and they are there providing the situational intelligence, particularly when we're in what we call response mode. And so that's when a decision has been made to activate under the flood manual. When the LFC comes into play, before that we only operate with an LOC because it's more of an operational function. When the LFC comes into play, they are often our program leads. So for somewhere like Coromandel, it would be Chloe Wilson. For other parts, it might be Paul Smith or Paula. And they are there really with a communication lens. When they activate, you can expect to see sit reps hitting your inboxes, and I really encourage you to keep an eye out for these because they're a brilliant source of information to give you an idea of where the zone's at, what's happening and what's changing over time. And these key roles at a local level are supported regionally by the Regional Flood Coordinator, who provide the overall coordination during an event, and the Regional Flood Liaison Officer, who is often connecting with our LFC. Next, please. So this is pretty much how it looks from our worldview. We'll be merely working away, delivering beautiful river and catchment work. And then we get a notification of a pending event that comes out from Met Service. Chances are by the time that hits our inbox, our amazing team in regional resilience or in emergency management have had a chat with Met Service, and they've got some further information to provide. So following that notification, we start to look at what intelligence we can provide, and also starting to get a sense of what's happening in our zones or catchments that's likely to impact. So that could be, have we got any work currently active in a floodplain? Do we need to go out and open a stream mouth that Tane touched on earlier? And are there any potential risks in any of our smaller schemes or large schemes? And we start sort of coming up with an initial game plan to kind of determine where are our vulnerabilities. So in areas like the Coromandel and Waipa, we don't get to manage the flood flow like we do in the Lower Waikato or Waiho and Piako. So we shift quite quickly to response. So response is when we are, again, gathering that information, checking in, understanding what the needs are, connecting with NZTA, Civil Defence District Councils, those sorts of things. So it's a very information heavy time and helps to start us to map out where we may need to look to focus our work. The investigation and recon really sort of happens once the event has passed, and then it very much moves into the other R's of remediation and recovery. If we can move on. So the warning, when they come through, there's different thresholds depending on where you are in the region. Obviously, Coromandel doesn't get too excited if it's, you know, less than 100 or 300 mils of rain. So the threshold is different here, whereas 100 mils in the Waiho or Piako is quite significant given the size of the catchment. So again, as I've mentioned, that intelligence and communications with RFLO and LOC kicks in really quickly. And we start looking at those pressure points and make a decision about who's going to be on duty. And often that, depending on the size of the event we're anticipating, will depend on who we put on duty based on their experience. During the event, we're sort of in a partial response mode. So it's that continual monitoring, information gathering. We set up spreadsheets really early on to start tracking where damage has occurred, and so that because we're often connecting through our networks. So within those zone flood manuals that I mentioned, we have our trusted key contacts throughout a catchment. So we'll be messaging them to gather what's happening locally and on the ground. We'll make a decision as to whether or not to activate. Now, this decision is important for a number of reasons. One, it potentially allows us to access regional or local disaster funds. But more critically, in terms of our ability to take action quickly, it allows us to access provisions within our comprehensive consents. And often that means we're enabled a longer work period to get back into river systems and carry out remediation work. And during Cyclone Gabriel and the more recent events for Waipa and Coromandel in January and February, those provisions are really critical. A really big part of it is actually looking out for our people. For those of you who've been around for a while, you know that we employ people that I refer to as flood junkies. We, thrive in a flood and really show our team's strengths and their resilience during an event. But often that means that as people leaders, we're buying sausage rolls or asking those people to stand down to make sure that they're looking after themselves and their families first. Often during an event, and this can be really, really hard, it's wait, watch, and kind of hope for the best. Now, this image on the right is after what we estimate to be close to 300 ARI rainfall event that hit northern Coromandel. It only hit the west coast. They were pretty much mowing lawns on the east coast, and we saw over 350 mils of rain fall in about 12 hours, and it turned the entire coast a delicious shade of coffee colour. Next, please. Sometimes we're having to check fact with fiction. So these images were posted online in the January event. I can confirm that is not Councillor Ma's boat in a paddock. But what often looks like it isn't true sometimes can be. So that image on the right was where the road was literally lifted by the Tairua River and placed it looking very much like some weird AI image. Next. Our 3 R's, remediation, recovery, and resilience. So river management is a real critical function. It provides flood mitigation in lieu of schemes. And so that's a pretty bold statement, and it's one Tane and I live by. And often our river management work allows us to build resilience for communities, for people who gather an income from that land, and operates where we know we can't have success by larger interventions. We use a lot of nature-based solutions that Tane has touched on. These are cost-effective, efficient, and they're integrated in terms of their design and delivery. We make sure when we're looking at where we can build resilience or looking at recovery that we look at catchment stability. We're looking at that upper catchment. What is the forest health? Is there an opportunity for the Department of Conservation or others to carry out extensive animal pest control? How do we store or build capacity into a system through wetlands? Those sorts of things. So for Coromandel, Waiho and part of the Waipa and Waikato catchments, we've just come off the back of delivery of CIP. So that was the original name of the fund was Crown Investment Partners. And so that was on the back of Cyclone Gabriel and Friends, and that injected a much needed investment into areas really hit during not only Cyclone Gabriel, but the friends she brought along with her. So we achieved a lot on that work, really stood up during this last event. The Grahams Creek flood scheme, the river management work achieved throughout that CIP work really did its job well, and we've had some positive feedback from landowners. So we're now set to build on that through Kānoa and their funding of what is called Tranche 2. It was actually originally called Before the Deluge, but now it's Tranche 2. And this will further support that work and remediation and resilience in those river systems. So I've been asked before, what is the secret to our success? Communication and connection is really key, and this isn't just internally in terms of who we're connecting with within the organisation or even with other agencies. It's often about how we're able to communicate with you as councillors and our communities in terms of building our knowledge. Contractors, through our As Required program, we have an ability to stand up work really quickly. We engage with often local owner-operator contractors who are highly skilled, they understand our business, they achieve a high level of compliance, and they understand that we don't always, that we don't want a channelized stream, that we want some really great environmental outcomes as well. And through these recent events, that's really shone through of our ability to procure quickly, get these guys on site, and they'll often ring us and say, hey, District Council's calling, but we thought we'd check in and see how you guys are placed and what your needs are going to be. So those contractors are really key. And that comes back to that communication and connection. We really forge a good relationship with them. I'm obviously biased, but we have incredibly committed staff based in geographic locations around the region, and these knowledgeable staff generally stay with us almost as long as Tāne. They tend to be really committed, they get involved in a community, and having them based in place means they understand the nature of the area, allowing us to really respond well and to the local needs. So I'm just going to quickly touch on the two recent events. We are, as Grant has mentioned, going to go into those in more detail at ICMC. But when reality hits, so the 13th of February Waipa event, these will be images you've likely seen. This was a significant event, localised and obviously with incredibly devastating effects. The weather warning for this was for the Coromandel. The team are prioritising work, restoring impacted channels and carrying out key actions as they come about and as they develop a wider work programme and focusing on those high risk sites. It takes a lot to understand the scale and impact of an event like this, and they're continually building that knowledge and understanding and coming up with a plan. It's meant the reprioritisation of some of our existing work programmes and having to look at some funding options. So the Coromandel event, while that was a bit of a doozy, I've been here 22 years with WRC, and it was the biggest I've experienced. So we had rainfalls around the 250 ARI annual return interval for rainfall over 24 hours. We saw Castle Rock, that frequently receives high rainfall, achieve its highest ever daily recording for that gauge, double what was received during Gabriel. We have private landowners who have been keeping rainfall data for 30 or 40 years, and they often provide us with that data. They're a trusted source. They had 841 mils in 48 hours, and 440 of that was in less than 24. And then just down the road, 780. So those properties at the bottom part of the catchment. Next. So we're still working to understand the full extent. This event has behaved in a very different way to Cyclone Gabriel and other events, and that has impacted probably 2/3 of the zone. And that has meant significant land instability issues. As I've mentioned, we've seen the benefit of the work we delivered under the CIP umbrella, but we're having to seriously refocus and reprioritise our work programme. But we're confident that the Tranche 2 work will support some of this recovery.
Hey, thanks, Emily. Just run through, there's only 2 more slides, I think, and then there was a question of Councillor Coxon's we'll come back to. Just to sort of wrap up, in terms of opportunities looking forward. So there's a whole freshwater regulatory landscape at the moment, and freshwater farm plans, and how our work meshes in with regulatory requirements for landowners. So that's a work in progress. Of course, we're waiting to see how the ink dries on the regulatory stuff. There are the iwi settlements and how we work with iwi. Of course, Hauraki, Coromandel, iwi are yet to settle, so we don't have joint management agreements with the groups up there yet, and it's going to be a while before we can see what flows out of that for us. Maintenance of existing soil conservation schemes, as Tane mentioned. Refining our priorities using the best available science and technology is an ongoing piece of work you'll hear more about. How we're telling our story to the wider catchment and public is a work in progress, something we've not done particularly well in the last 10, 20 years. Working with catchment groups and what is the role of catchment groups, our role in supporting them into the future, that's a larger and growing topic. And then, of course, you've got the overlay of all the RMA local government reforms coming in the next however long, year to 3 years. So it's a pretty busy landscape. In terms of reviewing our current work programs, as I mentioned, this is part of the Regional Catchment Management Framework project coming to you in a workshop on 31 March. So just how many summary points? 6. We have a strong mandate for undertaking this type of work. We have comprehensive whole of catchment funding systems in place. We have significant programs with hundreds of touch points across landowners, iwi and community. It's 200 to 300 landowners and groups that we're working with each year. We have complex and significant co-funded partnerships leveraging WRC funding to increase the scale of work and to reduce landowner costs. We know what works in terms of on-ground works, and we have a very experienced, capable team spread around the region. We're very lucky in that regard. We do undertake the critical flood response function for 6 of the 8 catchments. And coming back around to the committee members, the councillors, I should say, the key governance matters that we'll be bringing to you are the Regional Catchment Management Framework recommendations in terms of seeking your approval ultimately in a council meeting around those, which will set the direction for this work for the next 10 plus years. And then some of those recommendations will flow through into long-term plan considerations around changing resourcing or seeking resourcing or whatever it might be. So that's where the rubber hits the road. And I think that's the last one. Councillor Cookson's question was around how do we communicate with our catchments, with our catchment committees. So of course we have a lot of landowner interaction with individual properties, but on top of that, we do have a number of groups, catchment groups that we're in close contact with. There's all sorts of agencies and other advocacy groups, Coromandel, Taupō, we have a lot of contact with, and of course through yourselves. So there are a range of touch points. I'm not saying for a minute that that replaces the system of catchment committees that we used to have, but it is different. We still do get a lot of feedback from communities through those means. That sort of wraps up our hour. Obviously an hour is very tight to talk about such a breadth of work, and probably a bit too tight. No. But thank you.
Thank you. Warren did have a question about trimming poplars, of not letting it get too big, and the landowners responsibility for most probably tidying them up and stuff. So he did have that question before he left.
Yeah, it is a good point. Yeah, predominantly maintenance of our planting is a landowner responsibility, but we are there to provide support. And if it's a priority, and we can give a funding percentage as well. So yeah, absolutely. There's a window where you can undertake some maintenance and extend the life of this and reduce your future liability. And the idea would be to hit that point and not let them get out of control.
Yeah, I think we actually need to seriously consider, I brought that up in a meeting the other day where willow maintenance is done if it's just clipping the tops out of them, or because some on the Waihau are getting huge, like if you drive down out of Pyre, or the willows are staged through the planting, and the willows are way up there and everything else is like 10 metres below it, so they're starting to get out of control. Yeah. So, Noel, oh, sorry, Tipper was first. Sorry, Noel.
Just a question I don't need to answer today, but the impact, because we've gone to a lot of self-managed drainage schemes, and the impact of not just, I guess they've had levels of service conversation, but if any of the events hit that, what would the remedies be? And what would be, because we just haven't experienced that yet, and I again don't need an answer now if you don't have it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we'll be also providing you an induction into our infrastructure program. I think that'll be a good opportunity to talk about those arrangements.
Oh,
Just on that subject you were talking about, I've got a concern insofar as landowners in good faith spoke to council's predecessor and the council in the early days, planted those poplars on riverbanks and elsewhere, and they're now falling into the river or falling onto properties. And I'll disclose that that's the situation I find myself in. Those trees are far too big for landowners to deal with. It's not safe. And even contractors, it would be a major exercise. So just my concern is that because the landowners acted on advice from this organisation and putting them in, there needs to be some consideration as to how that situation is tackled going forward.
I've actually, and one last thing, unless anybody else has got a conversation. Gary Maguire's got a friend down in Wellington that is doing willow stacking and willow brush stacking or something for actually hard. It's a mechanism where you stack willow branches in a thing and then they cover it in the dirt that's already there. So you're not shifting material, and then you stack it in, and then the vegetation just comes back as a blanket armoring of a riverbank or something. So I'll let you take that offline. I think you should get his details. They've done some work in Horizons with it. But it's definitely, you need to talk to Grant about it, please, Gary. Thank you. And thanks, Emily, for coming online. Always appreciate your hard efforts that you and your team and all the other teams do in the Waikato region. So thanks very much.
Hey, thanks very much, everybody.
We'll just adjourn for 15 minutes.